Welcome to Hybrid World. I'm excited to talk to you today about a set of technologies that are going to shape your future. Folks, can you bring my slides up, please, so I can talk to them? This program is about technologies that are going to shape the future. There's a lot of people who talk about the future. There's a lot of people who talk about technology. The key word here is your future. I want you to think of this show and this event as an invitation and an orientation to the technologies that you can participate in. We've gathered a group of experts who are at the very forefront of applying these technologies to the world around us. And the point of this program is to acquaint you with those technologies and show you how they are going to affect your lives. We did that this weekend with our public event. We're making families acquainted with technologies and showing them that technology doesn't always have to be scary. It can actually be fun. Today, what we're going to talk about is technology that's going to reshape industry. We're going to be doing this for the next 2 days. And we've assembled a group of speakers from all over the world and from all over Australia who are experts in that topic. Before I jump into that, though, I want to answer a question I know some people in the audience are thinking or wondering about. They're saying, what on earth is a hybrid world? What does that mean? Last year, somebody said, it sounds like a Toyota dealership. Thanks. It's not a Toyota dealership. It's a simple idea, really. For more than 40 years, we've had digital technologies, and those have grown more and more sophisticated. And they've become more and more abundant and more accessible. But until fairly recently, digital technology was confined to a computer or a network. It wasn't part of our day-to-day lives. So we lived in the real world, and then sometimes we would go into the digital world, and then we come back out into the real world. So we were bifurcated in that experience. What's changing now is that we're beginning to integrate those things. The boundary between the real world and the digital world is evaporating. And digital technology is beginning to pervade and infuse the real world around us. It's beginning to change the way the world works. And so we thought we should probably create a program about that. Let's talk about that hybrid world intersection between digital technology and the real world, because that's where all the business opportunities lie. That's where the opportunities for growth lie. And so that's the point of the program. Now, a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to speak to my friend Tom Haydu, who's the chief innovator here, and he introduced me to the folks at Events SA, Hitaf and Mandy and some other folks. And we had a lively conversation about all the things you might be able to do in Adelaide with the high-speed network that you're bringing in. And that ended up in a conversation where they said, why don't you come to Australia? Bring all the people that you meet in your world travels. Bring the best speakers in the world and the people who are researching at the very forefront of these technologies. Bring them together for an event, a festival, a conference, and a workshop. And that's what we've created. We're so happy to be doing this with the support of the local government and the state government here in South Australia. So thank you all for your support. The point of Hybrid World is to acquaint you and orient you to this new changing world. Last year, I talked about dematerialization. Dematerialization into software, or dematerialization into pure information. It's a neat idea, but it's kind of a cumbersome term. I have a different term for it. I talk about things being vaporized. Literally, things are disappearing. I love that phrase, vaporized. It's like there's something you're familiar with, you see it here, and poof, tomorrow it's gone in a puff of smoke. That might seem like a fanciful notion, but it's actually true. We experience it every time we use our smartphones. Every person in this room has a smartphone. On average, you have about 80 apps on that phone. And every one of those apps represents something that used to be sold in a retail shop in physical form. We've replaced those physical items with software. We've already replaced books. We're in the process of vaporizing the book. Amazon now sells more e-books than hardbound and paperback books combined. Music services have also become vaporized. Nobody buys collections of CDs. We don't even download music necessarily anymore. Streaming music services, cloud-based streaming services, now represent the largest and fastest growing segment of revenue for the music industry. Maps. Do I need to talk about maps? Does anyone use a paper map anymore? I know that there's a whole generation growing up using smartphones that will never know what it means to be lost in a foreign city and have to read a foreign language map and find their way back to a hotel or some other place. The new maps are so much better than the old maps. They tell us where we are. They tell us where we're going next in the language of our choosing. The game industry has been completely revitalized and changed by mobile games. I brought the first mobile games to the United States in 2001, and everybody thought I was mad. Everybody I knew in the game industry thought I was crazy. Because, of course, the mobile phones were terrible places to play games in those days. But I knew that the microprocessors in the phones were going to increase, the bandwidth and the screens would increase in resolution, and I knew eventually that the mobile phone in your pocket would be the best place to play games. I wasn't wrong. I was early. Today, mobile games represents more than half of the total revenue for the $36 billion game industry. It's the fastest growing segment as well, and it dwarfs PC games and console games. So as you're starting to get the idea, what we're talking about then is we're replacing physical things with software. When I say we're vaporizing something, we're replacing physical stuff with software. This process isn't limited to maps or media or music. We're actually replacing physical things that we used to carry around. Think about it. Your smartphone's gotten really smart in the past 10 years. It's absorbed the functionality of about 25 consumer electronics devices. 10 years ago, if you walked in an airplane and say you had to get up to use the restroom, you'd walk down the airplane, you'd see people with Game Boys and those Sony PSP handheld game players and little DVD players. All of that stuff's been replaced now. Today, when you walk around in an airplane, everybody's looking at a tablet or a smartphone. We've absorbed the functionality of that hardware into our devices in the form of software. And for the companies that make consumer electronics, they've experienced double-digit decreases in sales of things like MP3 players and navigation units and digital cameras, because all that functionality has been replaced by software and sensors in your phone. So I believe that everything that can be vaporized will be. Everything that can be replaced by software will be. But I want to be very clear. What I'm not saying is that everything's going to be vaporized. That's not what I'm saying. And clearly, we still need shoes and clothes and food. Those things aren't going away. But the way we get them is going to change. Already, we're seeing early signs of that. For instance, if you don't feel like going to the grocery store, you can have someone else do that for you. If you don't want to deal with parking in the lot and so forth, services like DoorDash and Instacart and so forth will fetch things from the store. And if you don't know what you want, that's no problem. You can actually subscribe to a meal kit service, and they'll bring you a meal that you just have to assemble. So we're starting to rethink the retail experience as a form of software service. There used to be an elaborate apparatus for dating and meeting your mate. Today, that's been replaced by an app as well. And this winter, I got a letter from my doctor's office, from my healthcare company. They said, it's flu season. Don't come to the doctor's office. There's sick people there. If you need to talk to a doctor, use the mobile app. You can communicate with the doctor through your mobile phone. Spare yourself a trip to the office. It turns out that this is 78% more cost effective for healthcare providers to do consultation by phone. People like it because it saves them time. Companies like Uber and Lyft and Didi, these ride-sharing services, they haven't quite vaporized the car, but what they have done is they've transformed our understanding of transportation. So now a car isn't something that you necessarily have to lease or purchase in order to have transportation, because you can have transportation on demand as a service on your phone. And what they've certainly vaporized is the switchboard and the dispatcher. And all of these companies are well on their way to vaporizing the human driver behind the wheel. They need to make their economics work. When I wrote my book, Vaporized, the chapter that was most controversial turned out to be the chapter about the university, which really surprised me. I thought it was fairly innocuous. But it turns out there are a lot of university professors that are very fond of the university campus and all those ivy-covered brick buildings full of books. I believe all that stuff's going to be replaced by software eventually. So that chapter generated a lot of controversy in university circles. But as it turns out, in the couple of years since my book was published, every major North American university has published a version of their curriculum streaming live for free on the internet. And you might wonder, why would a university that charges $65,000 for tuition, why would they make that university curriculum for free? The answer is simple. They have no choice. Venture-funded startup companies are seeking to educate billions of people at scale, and they're offering education for free. So to remain relevant and compete, universities have to create that offer. I think what you're getting the point here is that this process of replacing physical stuff with software is causing us to rethink products. It's causing us to rethink what we make, how we manufacture it. What does that final product consist of? Is it just that thing in the box, or is it something that's connected to a digital service? And I know there's a long tradition and a long history here in South Australia of manufacturing. I think we're on the brink of rethinking all industries in terms of digital services. Because all goods have information content. And as goods become information rich, they begin to lose the characteristics of a physical product. They take on the digital dynamics of a service. That's a really important shift. Those digital services can respond to us. They can learn from users. They grow and expand. They keep us engaged. They build a customer relationship that you can grow. So every manufacturing company is going to begin to develop digital services that accompany their physical goods. That's not all. The smartphone's changing us. We're evolving. It's causing us to develop new behaviors. You probably noticed you've got some new habits, but it's most evident when you look at young people. 10 years ago, when the first smartphones came out, these kids in the back seat were playing Angry Birds. For the generation that grew up with mobile devices and tablets, the letters www don't stand for World Wide Web. They stand for whatever, wherever, whenever. That's the expectation that young people are growing up with today. These mobile apps respond to us so quickly. They give us command and control over media experiences. They're training us to expect the world to respond. And any service or product that doesn't respond to you that way, it looks like it's broken. It feels broken. As I was saying, 10 years ago, young people were playing Angry Birds in the back seat of the car, and then they grew up and became teenagers, and they were using Snapchat to communicate with their friends and swap emojis. And now they're young adults moving into their prime shopping years, their prime consumer years, and they're using Tinder and 1,000 other apps to run their daily lives. This is the point where you're going to reach them. This is the #1 place where you're going to connect with them. Consultancies have been trying to map the consumer journey as it evolves, but what keeps coming up is that people start their journey with digital. They start their journey with mobile devices. So if you want to connect with customers, you're going to have to begin to develop a capacity to reach them where they are, where they're spending time, and that's on their mobile screens. It's a gigantic opportunity. We're on track to reach a $7 trillion business opportunity, and that's just commerce around mobile phones. There's a lot of other opportunities I'm going to share with you. The greatest beneficiaries, though, of this process, of this tremendous transformation, might surprise you. In the past 10 years, I call it the smartphone decade. I want to show you what's happened in the smartphone decade. In 2006, this is what the most valuable companies in the world looked like. This is a list of the most valuable companies stack ranked by market capitalization. And as you can see, it's dominated by energy companies like ExxonMobil, BP, Royal Dutch Shell. There's one bank there, Citibank. There's one conglomerate, General Electric, and one tech firm, Microsoft. That was in 2006. Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007 and the App Store in 2008. So now let's take a look. Let's compare this list from 2006 with the same list, the most valuable companies in the world, in 2016. And you can see that the most valuable companies now are almost all tech companies. Yes, ExxonMobil's still there. They haven't grown much, and they've dropped far down the list because the tech giants have become so huge at such great valuations. But this chart was published in August of 2016. So I thought I'd refresh it. I went back in April this year to see if it had changed. And in fact, these companies, in 18 months since this chart was published, their valuations have increased on average by $200 billion, while the value of ExxonMobil has continued to decline. So I was getting ready to come here, and I thought, I should go back and check this chart. Has it continued to grow? Did it decline? Well, maybe a new company has emerged on this chart or something. And so in the month of May, just in the month of May alone, these companies added, on average, another $100 billion to their stock market capitalization. Wall Street and the investment community is sending a clear signal to every company in every industry. Vaporize your business. Adopt digital technology. Infuse digital technology into your products. That's what they're seeking companies to do. Those that do it are going to be rewarded. These companies have been able to build globe-spanning information empires, and they built it on top of the telecommunication network. These companies used the last wave of technologies. They harnessed the last wave of technologies to build these information empires, beginning with the massive investment that telcos made, moving from 3G to 4G and next to 5G. These companies also dominate mobile devices. They dominate search, discovery, monetization, browsing. They also dominate, in some respects, social networking, the way we find out about things, the way we tell each other about these things. Those were the building blocks of the last wave of technological innovation. What I'm going to tell you about now, what we're going to explore in the next 2 days, are the building blocks of the next wave. And this is what I think they are. The cloud as an accelerator for innovation. Crowdfunding of decentralized technology. The Internet of Things, connecting everything that possibly can be connected on the planet. Unifying the physical identity with the digital identity, bringing those two things together. And finally, machine intelligence and robotics. Now, we have subject matter experts on every one of these topics, but let me give you a quick overview. I'm going to sort of set the agenda for the next 2 days. First, let's talk about the cloud. Now, the cloud is not new. It's been around for 10 years. But our understanding of the cloud is evolving. And now we're moving into a time where people are starting to think differently about the cloud. The conversation used to always be about the public cloud. Not every company can participate in the public cloud. So now we're starting to talk about hybrid cloud. where you can use some stuff in your data center, you can use servers on the edge of the network, and so forth, different configurations of cloud services. And there's also the concept of multi-cloud. Multi-cloud means that you're not putting everything in Amazon's service. You can actually use Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and other cloud service providers. So our thought about how we use the cloud is beginning to evolve, and that's causing a tremendous surge in cloud activity. Cloud-based applications are growing at a rapid clip. Major corporations, enterprises, are starting to move their legacy systems to the cloud. Now, typically when we talk about this process, people say, oh, I know, you're vaporizing the data center. You're vaporizing servers. We don't have to spend money on equipment anymore because we're using software as a service. That's true. That's a very narrow way of looking at it, however. That's kind of like the accountant's view of the future. It's not an interesting way to look at it. I look at the cloud differently. I think of the cloud as an accelerant, and it accelerates innovation, and it does this in many, many ways. I want to show you just one example of how the cloud accelerates innovation. It's decreased the cost of launching a startup business 1,000-fold. Back in 2000, it cost about $5 million to launch a startup company. And then we had the introduction of reliable and highly available open source software that knocked out a tremendous amount of cost. 5 years later, Amazon's AWS, Amazon Web Service, introduced commercial cloud-ready services for startup companies. You could suddenly launch a business and put the entire infrastructure bill on your credit card. You didn't have to invest in servers before you launched a business. That's driven the cost of launching a company down rapidly by a 1,000-fold. And what that's done is it's opened up possibilities on a scale that I don't think everybody can appreciate because these things are invisible. So let me try to illustrate to you the incredible proliferation of innovation. The concept I want to share with you is called the adjacent possible. If you read the books of Stephen Johnson, you might know this term because he wrote about it in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From. But the idea was actually coined by a complexity theorist named Stuart Kauffman. Stuart Kauffman invented this idea, the adjacent possible. He was studying biological systems and looking at how adaptations worked. And he noticed that each adaptation made possible another set of adaptations. And then he made an analogy to the technology industry. He said, something similar happens in technology because when someone comes up with a new idea, when they implement a new kind of business, a new technology, a new platform, what they do is they open up a field of possibility. They make a whole range of new ideas imaginable for the very first time. So I'll illustrate this with a super simple diagram. Let's say we were talking about a business. Let's say we're talking about your business. And I think in a short conversation, we could say, where do you think your business is going in the next 5 years? And I think we would all agree that, gee, if all trends hold steady, we could probably agree what the likely state in the future of that business will be. But I think during that conversation, we'd also start to talk about what might be, some other possibilities. And perhaps you have a vision for how your business in the future ought to be. So that's a desired state that might be possible, but it's not connected to all those trends. How can we connect it? We use a process called backcasting. We define that future state, that desired state, and we think of all the things that are necessary to make it possible. And we start to identify those as business opportunities, or to use Stuart Kauffman's term, as ideas. Each idea makes the next idea possible. So you figure out idea number one, everybody migrates to that. Then you figure out idea number two, everybody migrates that. That is the process of the adjacent possible. It happens one idea at a time. The point I'm trying to make is that these ideas now come so fast because the cost of innovation has dropped thanks to the cloud. Some people describe the adjacent possible as a kind of room. Imagine if you had everybody in your industry, all your competitors in your firm, everybody's in this room, one big room. Well, it's pretty crowded. You want to kind of break out, you want to bust out and find a way to innovate, do things differently. And someone comes up with a new idea. It's like they punch a hole in the wall and they open a new doorway and it opens up a whole new dimension. And of course, everybody would rush into that room and start to expand. And then someone else comes up with another idea and they punch another hole in the wall and they open up another dimension and people rush into that room. That's what happens with the adjacent possible. That is the process of innovation. Each idea opens up a new dimension of possibility and that opens up yet more ideas, yet more possibilities. This is the process of the adjacent possible unfolding. And it doesn't happen on a single dimension. It's happening in multiple dimensions because we all have different ideas about what that future desired state might be. This multidimensional process is accelerated by the cloud. The cloud is rapidly expanding the cone of what is possible. It's very hard to see this because these services are invisible to us. You only see them on your phone as an app. So let me try to illustrate it with a map, if you will. You've probably seen these maps. They produce these landscape maps that show you all the players in a particular field. They do them for hundreds of industries. These particular maps are about marketing technology. And they come to us from chiefmartech.com. And the reason I wanted to share it is I want to show you the rapid proliferation of cloud-based services in just this one field. But this process is happening in 100 other industries as well. Back in 2011, Chief Martech identified 150 companies that offered cloud-based services on the web for marketing technology. By the following year, that number had doubled. And by the next year, it had more than doubled. Today, there are more than 7,000 companies that are offering some sort of cloud-based marketing service. Here's what the chart looks like in 2018. Look at that. It's worse than going to the eye doctor. You need a magnifying glass to see all the different firms. If you tried to evaluate each of these technologies, let's say you spent just 10 minutes evaluating these technologies, it would take you more than 2 months to grind through this entire chart. But even that wouldn't show you the full complexity of what's being enabled by the cloud. Because in fact, each of these companies publishes an open API, and so the customers can weave together their own custom solution. And that's a level of complexity we can't even show on this chart. We can't illustrate that. The point I'm making is simple. This is what the cone of possibility looks like when the cloud expands it so rapidly, this rapid proliferation of ideas. This is the adjacent possible at work. It's also worth noting that those giant firms that benefited so much from vaporization and mobile services, many of them are also leaders in the cloud. They're driving this process. And that's causing a kind of consolidation or concentration or centralization. And some people see that as a great risk. They see that as a risk, a handful of dominant companies that might control the future of computing. Others see it as a honeypot for data hackers because there's so much data tied up in those clouds. So some people are concerned about this, and that brings me to my second idea, second concept, crowdfunding decentralization. Now, this is not as well mature as what I've just described to you. This is relatively new. And it begins with Bitcoin. I know, Bitcoin. Everybody rolls their eyes. Oh, we know all about Bitcoin. It's a fraud. It's a gimmick. It's not real. It's not real money, right? You hear these things. There was a little bit of a debate last year. Is Bitcoin a bubble or is it not? You know, Bitcoin fluctuates in value constantly. Well, we got a conclusive answer to that question by the end of the year. In 2017, Bitcoin increased in price from $1,000 per coin to almost $20,000 per coin by December 2017. And in January, the bubble busted, and the price plummeted. And it went down from there as well. So it's bumping around now at about $6,000 or $7,000 per coin. So a lot of people said, forget it, it's over. Well, that's not really true. And Bitcoin went up and down, but it actually reverted back to the price where it was just about 8 months ago. So it hasn't plummeted to zero. And Bitcoin's like a sewer rat. You know, people keep trying to crack it and dismiss it, but it kind of survives. It's going to continue to survive. This talk's not about Bitcoin, but what I want to do is acquaint you with a key technology that makes Bitcoin possible. So I'll quickly brief you on some fundamental technologies. So what is Bitcoin? It's a digital currency, a digital cash. It's a digital store of value. It's a way for people to pay for things in the digital domain. We spend so much time in a digital domain that we need a currency for it. That was the premise behind it. Now, many other people had tried to build a kind of digital currency in the past, but they failed. It was hard to do in the 1990s. There were key pieces of technology that were missing. What you need to understand about Bitcoin, it is entirely decentralized. There's no central bank. There's no one who's setting the exchange rate. The way Bitcoin operates, it's entirely open source, which means you can take that code and write your own coin. And in fact, many people have done that. So it's a currency that's controlled by no government. It's a currency that's controlled by nobody. That's one of the reasons why it varies so much. It fluctuates so much. What makes it possible to do exchanges with Bitcoin and have confidence that the trade is actually happening is the underlying protocol known as the blockchain. Some people call the blockchain the trust protocol. And it is a brilliant innovation. It's what makes it possible for Bitcoin to be entirely decentralized. Thousands of servers all over the world have to calculate numbers. They're doing mathematical calculations constantly, and when they agree on the result, they achieve consensus, they seal that block of transactions into a distributed ledger. Anyone can inspect that ledger. In the past, your ledgers for your business were proprietary information. It's something your accounting department had. Bitcoin has a concept of a public ledger that anyone can look at. Anyone can see the transactions that happen. And the transactions are only encoded when the entire network of computers achieve consensus. That's a novel concept, and that's actually why Bitcoin works, and this has not been hacked. In fact, it's the fundamental concept behind a great number of other innovations. Because, not every transaction requires cash. Inside of companies, and sometimes inside of trading partners, goods and services are exchanged, and cash isn't what they use to track that. And so the blockchain then is a distributed ledger based on group consensus, and it enables us to do all kinds of transactions, not just cash transactions or coin transactions. There's a concept of a smart contract. A smart contract is enabled by the blockchain. A smart contract is simply a software program that's a self-executing contract. And so if condition A and condition B are met, then the goods are exchanged or the payment is shipped through. So that blockchain concept can enable smart contracts. The smart contract idea has been around since 1994, but there was no way to do it previously. Now that we have the blockchain, we can actually enable smart contracts. That means machines can transact with each other. You can have a digital agent that will do a trade on your behalf. It's a novel idea. Self-executing software program. Some people describe a smart contract like a kind of vending machine. You put a coin in the machine, and when the coin's received, it unlocks the goods and gives them to you. That's not a bad way to think about it. It's actually a nice analogy for what's emerged in the last 5 years, cryptocurrencies of all sorts that are built as smart contracts on top of the Ethereum blockchain. And last year, we saw a number of new currencies issued. The kind of cryptocurrency mania happened in 2017. These coins are not the kind of coins you'd use to buy things. They're coins that are used to do transactions within a closed economy, perhaps within an industrial segment or an industrial vertical. And so the phrase people are starting to use now, they're describing these as token economies. A company will issue a set of tokens. They're going to have a blockchain that's not controlled by anyone, but it's accessible to anyone in that industry. And goods and services can be exchanged, and the tokens are the way to track that, the way that the smart contracts are executed. So that is a simple overview, short overview, of a fundamental technology using blockchain to enable tokenized economies. And last year was a record year for issuing these new currencies, these new digital currencies, through a process known as ICO, an initial coin offering. And that's modeled on the initial public offering, but there's a really important difference here. We're not selling stock, we're not selling securities, so it's not an initial public offering. It's an initial coin offering. Companies are actually issuing tokens to people who want to buy them so that they can build the software and build out this blockchain-enabled trading marketplace. This is transformative stuff. Because most businesses today, most industries today have a few centralized players who dominate the supply chain. So this could completely change the way we think about commerce. And in 2017, we saw ICOs, more than 450 ICOs, in initial coin offerings, in all of these industry segments. And as you can see, they range from things like games and gambling to security and data privacy to trading and investing. And more than a third, 34% of the ICOs were for infrastructure, open source infrastructure. So the way to think about a coin offering is that we're raising money from crowds. The money that's coming into these coin offerings isn't coming from institutions, it's not coming from venture capital or banks, it's coming from individuals. We're crowdsourcing at a massive scale. And this process, too, is accelerating. It's moving incredibly fast. Here are just 4 examples from 2017 of the 450 ICOs that happened in 2017. Filecoin raised $257 million in 30 days. EOS raised $185 million in 5 days. Gnosis raised $12 million in 12 minutes, and Brave raised $35 million in 30 seconds. Now, if you've ever raised money for a startup company, you know it's a painful process that takes years. You start with your early round with angel investors and seed funding, and then you try to put together the material for a first round, and then those investors say, great, go accomplish something, and we'll do a second round, a third round, a fourth round, and so forth. That process can take years. Each round of financing takes the founders on the road for months at a time. This is a novel funding technique. Crowdfunding at scale for open source software means that we are now generating open source software projects that are fully funded in a matter of days and sometimes in a matter of minutes. And again, that's accelerating innovation. Last year, of all of the crowdfunding ICOs that were launched, only about 48% were successful. So some didn't work. But still, those that were successful raised $5.6 billion, and most of that money went to open source software projects. In the past, you never could finance an open source software project. This is a novel way of funding something that lies outside of the control of a corporation. And the process continues. This year, more than that amount of money was raised just in the first quarter of 2018, and EOS just raised a whopping $4 billion from a crowdsourced ICO. This is a novel funding technique, and what it's funding is decentralized software, software that is not dominated by one of those gigantic internet companies. That brings me, and this is a process that's happening in Australia as well. I want you to know that there are Australian companies like Skrilla, Power Ledger, and Horizon State. Last year at Hybrid World, we showcased the first blockchain solution for the agriculture industry. So there are companies here that are using these technologies. This is not something that just happens in a foreign place like California or China or Korea. These are actually technologies that are accessible to Australian innovators as well. Now, you're going to start to see that I'm describing a kind of collision between two gigantic forces, these internet giants and this novel concept of crowdsourced, decentralized software. And I think one of the places you're going to see that play out is in the Internet of Everything. And again, this is not new. The Internet of Everything's been an idea that's been around since 2013, but it's had some fitful starts and stops. There are a couple of reasons for that. The simple concept behind it, though, is that whatever can be connected will be connected. And I truly believe this is going to happen. I think this is an inevitable process. There are lots of reasons why that's happening. You're probably familiar with some of the early attempts from 2013, 2014, things like Google Glass, and people dismissed it as a fad, as a goofy thing nobody really wanted to wear. But it's actually found new life in industrial applications where workers need their hands free. And there's actually a couple competitors. That's always a validation that the idea is good. We've also seen examples of other wearables, things like fitness trackers and smart watches. People dismissed the Apple Watch when it first came out. They said Apple doesn't know anything about fashion. They can't be a fashion company. They don't understand how fashion works. Today, Apple's the largest seller of watches in the world. They outsell all the watch companies in Switzerland, and they did that in 3 years. But I think these early stage versions of wearables are going to look a little bit quaint in just a few years because we've already seen that we're developing technologies for input on a human body. Things like temporary tattoo, projectable interfaces where there's no actual surface. You're simply using gesture control and you're tracking that to get the input from the user. Ingestible computers that you can swallow that pass through your body and send wireless data about your body chemistry to your healthcare provider. And in Sweden now, there are people who are implanting these chips in their hands so that they can replace their credit cards. They can actually use public transportation without needing to carry a card. It's built into their body. Sounds a little weird, but the place we're going to in the future, I think, is that we're going to start to see emerging in biology and technology. Other speakers today will tell us a bit about them. You probably noticed also in your home, your devices in your home are starting to wake up and get smart. Like things like this Nest thermostat that can track the activity in your home. There's a mild form of artificial intelligence that tracks people in the home when they wake up, when they leave the house, and it starts to learn your habits and it can adjust the temperature in your home accordingly. This withing smart scale can help you keep track of your fitness goals. Smart door locks that recognize you or your car when you come home. You can set them to recognize a guest or a housekeeper or somebody else who needs to get access to your home when you're not there. Now, the companies that dominate the internet today are well aware of this expansion opportunity, and they're rushing to build software to enable people to develop experiences that use Internet of Everything. So here I'm showing examples from Apple and Google in mobile payments, integration of software into automobiles, integration into home devices, healthcare, and voice command, novel ways to communicate so that you don't have to tap on a screen all the time to talk to these smart devices. So the big companies see this as an opportunity to expand. They're rushing in, but we're also going to start to see open source blockchain initiatives in the Internet of Everything as well. Because what's happening is we're starting to robotize and connect environments, entire rooms. This is a display in a museum in Cleveland, Ohio. It's the largest display, touchscreen display I've ever seen. And when I go to that museum, I always like to watch elementary school students use it because when they rush up to it, they don't need instructions or a demo. They know instinctively that this is for them. They rush up to it, they touch it. The physics are beautiful, they're perfect. You can swipe, you can spin, you can stop, you can expand. Children understand instinctively that this is a wall that's designed to respond to them, and they're growing up with the expectation that they're going to be in responsive environments. And in the future, they'll work in places like fully robotized factories that are also responsive to their presence. This is a new stadium that's being built in Los Angeles. It will be the most connected stadium in the world so that people inside the stadium can participate in a meaningful way during the game, participate with other fans, or perhaps with the other team's fans, or with people who are not in the stadium. We're going to start to erase the boundaries that keep people outside that stadium experience. We've heard all about robot vehicles, and we'll hear more about that this week at Hybrid World. One way to think about those autonomous vehicle programs is it's not so much about the car. The way tech companies look at this is it's like a giant rolling smartphone loaded with sensors. It's gathering data at the millimeter scale as it rolls through the city, and it's helping those companies build gigantic information assets about a town. And those robot vehicles work best in a smart city that can track and respond to those vehicles in real time. So this LED light system from Ericsson can be loaded with other sensors to track emissions, traffic patterns, even gunshots if necessary. We're going to be hearing about smart cities tomorrow from Nick Faulkner, who's an expert on the topic, and he's here at the UniSA. We're starting to see sensors embedded into industrial environments, particularly in industrial environments that are geographically dispersed, like oil rigs and oil pipelines and so forth. Now, they've had some sensors loaded on them, sometimes 100 or 500 sensors, but now we're going into scale of thousands of sensors that can measure every single thing that's happening. The price of sensors, like all things computing, continues to drop. And so we're going to start to embed sensors into the environment around us, the buildings around us, and so forth. Eventually, the entire city will become a computing surface that is responsive to people. And there are opportunities here that are not dominated by the internet giants, and increasingly we're seeing blockchain technology deployed to govern these activities. Let me illustrate the scale of this opportunity. When everything is connected, we're going to take the hundreds of millions of computers that we have today, the laptops, but also the servers. Those are already talking to billions of devices, mobile devices. About 4 billion mobile devices right now, and we sell about 1.5 billion more each year. Those mobile devices, in turn, are connected to tens of billions of smart devices, Internet of Things devices. That number increases so rapidly, they project that there'll be 50 billion smart devices in the next 5 years. And ultimately, over the longer run, maybe 10 years or more, you're going to start to see trillions of sensors embedded into the environment around us, into the roadways, into the walls of the buildings, perhaps even into ourselves, into our bodies. Collectively, all these network devices generate enormous amounts of data. We live in a time of data deluge. Huge amounts of data that exceed human capacity for understanding. We're living through the fastest growth of anything humans have ever produced. Data output from all those devices. Literally a 44-fold increase in the amount of data generated each year. We're living through that right now. So when we talk about the Internet of Things, it's not just about a smart device in your house. It's not just about a smart thermostat or some other gizmo, something on your wrist. I mean, that's one aspect, but that's a very narrow aspect. The way to think about the Internet of Things is to think of it as a system of systems. Systems that talk to each other, that communicate with each other. And sure, it consists of smart devices, mobile devices, that are talking to sensors in the environment around us. And all of those things are connected to cloud computing. And the cloud will deliver digital services, and those digital services track our response. And they generate huge data sets, really, really big data sets. Data sets that are so big that human beings cannot manage them. We need machine learning, cognitive computing, and artificial intelligence to manage those enormous data sets. And later today and tomorrow, you're going to hear from experts in the field who are working at the forefront of artificial intelligence and machine learning. All of these things combined together create the environment for the Internet of Things. That's why it's taken us so long to launch the Internet of Things. And yet I think we're still not thinking big enough. I think there's an even bigger opportunity, and a really important one for manufacturers. And I've got a great example from South Australia here to show you. You see, not everything can be connected. Not everything in the world is going to have a microprocessor and a power supply and a wireless connection. There's a lot of dumb objects in the world, if you will. They're not smart. We can't make them smart. So not everything can be connected, but everything has a digital identity. And so there's an opportunity. If we can find a way to unlock the digital data content that's embedded in physical things, we can activate those things, even if they themselves are not connected to the network. Last year, Dave Garner from Treasury Wines showed an excellent example at Hybrid World. I was so happy to see this because I was like, oh, wow, cool. These guys get it. They're on it. You know the wine 19 Crimes. You've probably seen this. This wine is available all over the world. What's interesting is that label builds on the Australian lore, the convict lore, the origin myth of Australia. And they decided to build on that a little bit and illustrate it. And so they built an augmented reality app. And when you see that bottle of wine, you can use your mobile phone to scan it. And that face in the bottle comes to life and starts to tell you the story of the transport to Australia. And it's actually really brilliant. If you haven't experienced this, Dave's here somewhere in the audience. He'll show it to you. I was super impressed by this. I loved it. Because I was aware of something that was happening in the United States that's a gigantic concern for marketers and manufacturers of consumer goods, and it is this. The retail channel is collapsing. In the United States, retail is collapsing. We're closing more stores than we open. Last year, 10,000 shops were closed. 10 major chains went out of business. 100,000 retail jobs were lost. And the people who depend on that retail channel to reach consumers are freaking out. The manufacturers of consumer goods are freaking out because they don't want their business to decline in lockstep with those retail stores. But at the same time, the other channel they use to reach people is television. And TV is in the process of collapsing. Broadcast television supported by ads. The growth is over. It's declining as people migrate en masse to streaming video services that don't have ads. And so for makers of consumer products, they're starting to freak out because the two channels they have to reach a mass audience are in decline, and they don't want to decline with them. So that forces them to rethink what their product does. The product has to work a little harder. The product is the new channel. And that example from Treasury Wines is a brilliant example of how a smartness can be unlocked in a physical product that doesn't have a digital connection. And that brings me to the next concept: hybrid physical and digital identity. For the last 2 years, I've been working with an organization called GS1 in the United States. GS1 is operating in just about every country in the world. It's a global standards body for product identity. They issue barcodes. They issue about 5 billion barcodes a year. Every manufacturer is a member of the GS1 consortium. And GS1 approached me a couple years ago and they said, you know, we need to find a new standard. We've got physical identity figured out. We're good. But we haven't figured out digital identity. There's no standard for that yet. And so we're trying to find a way to combine digital identity together with physical identity so that that barcode can be scanned and it doesn't just tell you the SKU number for that product, but actually unleashes a whole lot of data. It turns out there's a cloud of invisible data surrounding every physical product. Brand marketing information, like that example from 19 Wines, but also the documentation that comes with a product, information about sourcing. Think about it, there are a lot of consumers who really care whether the coffee they drink is fair trade, or whether something is gluten-free that they're going to eat, or whether other food products in the grocery store are properly sourced, or whether they're compliant with a certain diet that they happen to have. Consumers really care, but they really want to know about that sourcing. Today, you can't get that information in the store. But if we could find a way to fuse that information with the product identity, then that would be accessible to consumers. The same thing is true of the ingredients inside of a device or inside of a product, or the components inside of a car. The history of ownership, like when you buy an automobile, shouldn't the repair history travel with that to the new owner? And all the information about upgrades, software updates to products, all this should come along with the physical product. Today, that's not possible, but if we can unify physical and digital identity, then we can make all that digital information travel with the physical product, and that will change the world around us. You'll be able to set your preferences on an augmented reality experience so that when you shop in a grocery store, you will only see the products that fit your dietary preferences. And when your mechanic is working on your car, he'll be able to spot things like failing parts that are perhaps due for replacement, or even counterfeit parts. As we move through the world, we're going to start to unlock invisible data. We'll be able to perceive it with augmented reality. In retail, in the supply chain, this will increase efficiency, reduce the number of human errors, because we'll start to have rock-solid information and identity at the level of the individual item. And these systems are not limited to human beings. They're machine-readable systems, which means that our robots are going to be able to start to see things around us and move and make autonomous decisions. And so the city itself will start to be something that machines can read and track and understand. Now, tomorrow morning, you're going to hear from a number of companies here in Adelaide that are already developing systems to track ground-based installations, which could be anything from cattle on a ranch, or livestock and other kinds of livestock, or a container ship that's moving across the ocean. They're tracking them from space. So machine-readable data that can be read from outer space. This is where we're heading. These technologies exist today. It brings us to the concept of a digital twin. Digital twin, it's a perfect digital representation of a physical product. The concept was introduced at CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider. Pretty complicated piece of kit, very expensive machine. You don't want to break it. And yet what they're doing is they're colliding particles at extremely high speed, and if they do it wrong, it could be a catastrophic result. So what they've done is they built a perfect digital model of the Large Hadron Collider, and they can run simulations in that digital model, and that tells them how best to operate the real machine. That concept has now been borrowed by companies like General Electric, and GE now makes digital models of complex equipment like turbines and jet engines. It turns out, I learned to my surprise, that every jet engine is different, because every jet engine goes through different kinds of air, different kinds of moisture, and so forth, and it evolves a little bit differently. What GE has done is embedded sensors in every jet engine that they sell, and they can track the wear and tear on parts. So when that airplane lands at the airport, GE technicians already know which parts need to be replaced. They already have the information before the airplane lands, and they're there right when it pulls up to the gate. They can replace the parts on those engines so that the airplanes can stay in the air longer. Airlines don't want their airplanes in a hangar being repaired. Airlines want the airplanes in the air. So we're increasing uptime, we're increasing efficiency, we're increasing productivity with digital twins. This digital twin, as we start to embed sensors in everything in the environment, we're going to start to be able to build digital twins of factories and business processes as well. This is a gigantic opportunity. It's a very early stage, and only advanced manufacturing companies are doing it. Here's the way to think about it. Software models used to be something that lived on a computer. You can model anything in software, but it was typically constrained to the digital domain. Now what's happening is software models are beginning to act and operate on the real world around us. The software model tells us how to operate the real world. And that brings us to the brink of something rather radical and futuristic, which is the idea that we're moving into a completely robotized and automated supply chain. Now, what I'm about to tell you is more or less speculative. The technologies exist, but I'm about to show you how these pieces all converge together if we take all those building blocks I've described so far. The idea of robots in a factory is not new. We've had robots in an automobile manufacturing for more than 30 years. But these robots are deaf, dumb, and blind. They can't see you. They don't know you're there. And actually, they might kill you if you get in the way. That's why they always chain off or fence off the robots in the auto plants. There have been 3 deaths where people got in the way of a robot in an auto plant. So it's a dangerous thing to get in front of. Those are old school robots. The new robots look more like this. This is the Baxter robot from Rethink Robotics. And the Baxter robot costs $22,000. That puts it in range of any small manufacturer. The Baxter robot's so small and lightweight, it can be lifted by 2 people. It doesn't have legs. You can just put it on a table. It has 2 arms, so it can do 2 tasks at once. You can teach it how to do something in a few minutes. And it has a face. It has sensors. It can see you. It's not going to hurt you. That means that human beings can work alongside robots in factories. The robots aren't going to steal our jobs. The robots are going to help us become better at our jobs. Robots now have incredible skill. They can handle delicate things. They can actually handle fruit, like they can pick a grape. They can close the lid on a bottle. We actually have robot surgeons that can make an incision or a suture more accurately than any human surgeon. These are robots we can trust with our lives. So some companies are starting to say, how much of our business can we robotize? Can we robotize every single thing? And JD.com, an e-commerce company in China, announced recently that they have now built their first entirely robotic plant. Adidas, the shoe manufacturer, has announced Speed Factory, where they have an entirely robotic factory that can do mass customization at scale. So we've introduced a new concept, a dark factory. There's no lights on because it's all robots. They're doing all the work. Think of it as like a machine. You put raw material and parts in one end, and finished product comes out the other side. That's the factory, the robot factory. The next step is the port. Right here in Australia, Oceano is at the forefront of developing robot ports. Port Botany is a robotized port. You have that. They've also developed robot trains as well for moving freight across Australia. They have to, because they compete with major shipping ports all over the world, and everyone's moving to robotics and automation. The great shipping company Maersk has announced that they've developed plans for robot fleet, robot shipping containers that can cruise around the world without human crew. And of course, when those goods arrive at their port destination, they'll probably be picked up in the near future by a robot vehicle, a robot truck. Otto, which is owned by Uber, and Waymo, which is owned by Google, are already testing robot trucks. And this testing is happening in the US and also in Europe. And of course, robot factories, this is not new. Amazon has been testing robot factories now for about 5 years since they bought Kiva Robotics. Other companies are keeping up. And these adorable Pepper robots from SoftBank in Japan are starting to show up in Japan and also in the United States in stores. They help people navigate through the store. It's like a robot clerk inside of a shop. But some companies are saying, forget the retail shop altogether. Let's just go with a robot drone that will deliver the packages directly to you. Now, all of these things exist. I'm not making any of this up. They're not unified, though. So they're all siloed, completely different implementations of robotics. What I believe is going to be the next frontier is to unify this into an entirely robotic supply chain, from the factory to the shipping port, to the container ship, to the other port on the other end, to the truck, to the logistics center, and ultimately to the retail shop near you. A fully robotized vision. I know it sounds crazy, it sounds like science fiction, but the point I'm trying to make is that every single one of these technologies exists right now. The opportunity is to find ways to integrate them so that they run well. And I believe that we are going to draw on all the technologies I just talked about to make this possible. These are the building blocks for the next wave of innovation. It begins with hybrid digital and physical identity, rock-solid identity, so we know exactly which product we're dealing with, exactly which item. That will enable software automation and robotics to identify the right product, get it to the right place. Machine learning and deep learning will help us understand the patterns and optimize those systems over time. The machine-readable metadata that's encoded and travels with that physical product, thanks to the hybrid identity. That means that robots will be able to read those packages, understand them, recognize them, know what they're handling. I believe that as goods move through this system, all those transactions will be recorded in the blockchain. And finally, we'll need multi-cloud technologies like container-based virtualization, so that we can migrate from one vertical application to another in different cloud environments. These are the building blocks of the next wave of innovation. I know some of this sounds like science fiction. I know for some of the people in the room it does not. It sounds like what they're working on right now. The point I'm trying to make is that this space is wide open. It's an open opportunity for innovation, and it's open to the people in South Australia if you choose to embrace it. And with that, I want to thank you and welcome you to Hybrid World. I'm Robert Tercek, the author of VAPORIZED, which was the 2016 International Book of the Year. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. And now let me introduce our next speaker.